Welcome back to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and with me is voiceover talent, radio personality in the Bay Area, and the proprietor of KYA Radio Online, Gary Mora. Gary, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This will be fun. Look forward to it.
Well, tell us about your life growing up and how you got into voiceover and eventually radio.
Well, I grew up in Redwood City, which is in Northern California. It's about 30 miles south of San Francisco. And all through school, all I ever heard was, you should get into radio or TV or be a comedian. I was always in the hallway because I made everybody laugh. The teachers usually put me out there, and they'd be laughing too. So it wasn't too disruptive. It was just fun. And then I got to thinking, as I made my way through high school and get ready for college, that I should think about radio or TV. And in one case, one of the guys I went to school with ended up being a famous movie director and a choreographer, and he begged me to get into acting. So it's all kind of connected, entertainment. And I'm a drummer, and I played, I was a ballroom dancer at Dance Masters of America, so I did shows everywhere, which also helped make me more outgoing and get used to being in front of crowds. So that was kind of my childhood, just a lot of humor, tons of music, and just having fun. And our business is fun as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, definitely.
Really fun.
Who is the person who encouraged you to get into to show business?
So many people. As I just mentioned, everybody that went to school with me said that Kenny Ortega, who choreographed Michael Jackson and involved in movies, and he was kind of pushing me to do something with what he thought I had talent in. He told me to go into acting at drama school, but I was too cool for that. I kind of wish I had done it, but I eventually took classes later on in acting. But he saw things, and other people did too, in me that I didn't even know. But I always had a passion for entertaining people and making them happy. And that's why it's a good fit for me, this radio, TV, and films, which I've done, and also high-tech voiceovers for the biggest companies in the world. And I'm fortunate enough to live here in the Bay Area, and I'm kind of surrounded by Apple and Siebel Systems and all the big guys, Sprint, and they all asked me to do voice work for them, and that turned out great, too. So it wasn't all entertainment. It was serious stuff, too.
Oh, yeah.
But it all worked out fine.
Who are your favorite radio personalities growing up?
Let's see. Well, Tom Campbell, who I ended up getting to know at KYA, I listened to him when I was a kid. And in later years, when I got into the business, which I'll go into in a moment, in Lake Tahoe, I heard Wolfman Jack for the first time. Little did I know that I would someday be a co-host with him and do shows with him, personal appearances. But he just cracked me up. I couldn't get enough of him, and I didn't know how a guy could get away with saying the things he did without getting in trouble. Stern is another guy. Howard, I could never do what those guys were able to do without getting in trouble with the FCC. So I would say those two guys were really big influences. Dick Clark before that, and I ended up working with him too. But he was a big influence. I loved the way he presented himself. And as far as the oldies are concerned, that's maybe the reason I got into doing the oldies on radio, because I loved everything about it. And he really was smooth and a total pro. And I told him that when I finally got to meet him, which was great.
That's great. Actually, a couple of months ago, I got to interview Stacy Waller. She was a dancer in American Bandstand back in the 1980s, and she had wonderful memories of working with Dick Clark. And she even keeps in contact with a bunch of former bandstand dancers. There's a lot of them. I didn't realize, so hopefully I'll get to interview more of them.
I've been reading about that lately. They've shown pictures of the old-timers, and they're still around and still dancing. That is amazing. That's great. Wow.
Yeah, and Tall Tom Campbell, I'll confess, I'm a game show junkie. And I remember watching Tom Campbell hosting the short-lived Camouflage, which was a Chuck Barris production in 1980, and that's how I was introduced to him. And he was, he was really good. It was a shame that he didn't get to host more game shows nationally. But at that point, Chuck Barris, his reputation had been kind of sold by another game show called Three's a Crowd, which the host himself, Jim Peck, admitted was probably the second worst game show ever in history. And in fact, Peck said to me, Chuck Barris called him like a year later after Three's a Crowd was canceled, and Chuck said, Jim, was a problem with that show. And Jim's like, I'm thinking a million different things. He's like, nobody enjoyed themselves. Nobody had fun. You didn't have fun. The contestants didn't have fun.
One of the big game show guys happened to be one of my close friends, and that's Jim Lange. You remember the dating game?
I do, yeah. Gentleman Jim.
Worked with him for about 8 years, and he was amazing. We'd be together at KSFO, and he would leave after his morning show to fly to Los Angeles to shoot more TV shows. And he did that 3 or 4 times a week. I don't know where he got the energy, because he put everything into both venues. And he was just amazing. And he was on for about 18 years, I think, on the TV show. Many years.
In fact, he even hosted the Name That Tune, did a great job. Unfortunately, it only lasted a year, which was a shame, because I think he did an awesome job with that. It was right down his alley because, music and stuff like that. And
oh, gosh, yeah.
But yeah, he was Gentleman Jim was what he's called, and I've heard nothing but great things about him.
What a sweet man. Oh, man, I miss him so much. We used to meet for lunch, and we were up at the Fairmont, San Francisco, where KSFO studios were, owned by Gene Autry. Mm-hmm. And couldn't have been a better place for a young broadcaster to learn. There's no university I could have gone to that would have been better. We had the top personalities, including Al Michaels, Monday Night Football. I was his producer and engineer for about 5 years for the Giants. And Lon Simmons, who's locally known, he's in the Hall of Fame for sportscasting. John Madden was our sports guy. Got to work with just the very best. That's what a blessing. And what fun people. Really great people.
Tell us about the Autry system of radio that made it the success that it was. What was that magic ingredient or ingredients that made it top notch?
I think the fact that Gene came from show business and he understood the stress and pressure of having a radio show or being on TV or in the movies. He really understood us, so much so that he would come to our Christmas parties. And I'll never forget one Christmas, I had some drinks with him, and he got a little bit looped. And I asked him if he would sing Rudolph with me. And we did it, and people were hysterical. He was slurring the words, and he was just the best boss that you could possibly ask for. Younger people may not know Gene Autry, but he was a movie star. He had huge recordings, especially at Christmas time, with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and just Frosty the Snowman. Mm-hmm. He was the singing cowboy. And in addition to the Golden West Radio Network, he owned several stations. Mm-hmm. He also owned baseball team. He was a very brilliant businessman. And I looked up to him, and I should never have gotten him drunk. Bad me. I got it. But it was fun. Oh, man. It was great fun.
Gene Autry owned the legendary 710 KMPC in Los Angeles, and Jim Lange was even on there in Morning Drive for a couple of years in the mid-1980s. And I read that he originally had the Dodgers. He was the first radio station in Southern California to cover the Dodgers. But then in 1961, the Dodgers moved it over to 64 KFI. So Gene Autry says, I want baseball on my station. That's when he invested in the Los Angeles Angels, who eventually became the California Angels.
That's right. Yeah, he was the big owner. And what happened was his wife, as he got older, started unloading the properties. But he handled everything beautifully. He was a very smart businessman and just a terrific guy to hang out with. What a fun person. Yeah.
I mean, KSFO and KMPC, was KSFO also called the Station of the Stars? Because that's the moniker they gave to KMPC, which had legends down in Southern California like Jim Lange, Gary Owens, Wink Martindale, Jeff Edwards, Johnny Magnus, Ira Cook, Johnny Grant was even on there, the honorary mayor of Hollywood. What were the differences between KSFO and KMPC that you could remember?
Well, first of all, we were called the world's greatest radio station, and we had the most popular DJ that Northern California has ever seen. His name was Don Sherwood, and I actually got to work with him as well. And his ratings were in the 30s. I mean, he was just the most phenomenal DJ ever. He was a bit before my time, but we became friends, and he ended up being like a second dad to me. We really got to be close buddies. But he was by far the most popular DJ that San Francisco and the Bay Area has ever seen. And no matter who went up against him, they lost. He asked Jim Lange to run across the Golden Gate Bridge with him and to time it, and it was a contest, and it drew 100,000 people on the bridge.
Wow.
But that shows you the power of his persona on the radio. There's never been anybody like him. And he went away for a while. They paid him a tremendous amount of money, KSFO did, so that he wouldn't go to work for another radio station. And he eventually came back to us, and that's when I came on the scene and got to know him so well. And I learned a lot from him.
Wow.
What a talent. He also had a TV show for many years in San Francisco that was so big that they were grooming him for The Tonight Show. And he went back there for a couple of weeks with NBC and told them to stuff it. He said it was too much stress. He also was shipped off to Hawaii, and I think it was Aku Papona, who was a big name DJ in Hawaii. They switched places for about a month, and Don hated it. They didn't get his humor. He said that he was going to float back in a martini glass back to San Francisco, where his home was. He dated people like Judy Garland. I don't know if you know that back.
Wow.
He was a wild man. He got drunk all the time and took pot shots at Ronnie Shell, who was his best friend, comedian Ronnie Shell.
Oh, yeah.
And Ronnie told him, he made the mistake of telling him at dinner, that he was a deer hunter. And Don said, "Oh, so you like to shoot deer?" He said, "Why don't I'll give you a head start. You run in my backyard, and I'll take pot shots at you." And I guess he did, shooting over his head, of course, and at the ground. But what a picture that conjures up. Oh, my God. He was a wild man.
Now, before going to the Bay Area and radio, you said you were in Redwood City, was it, or somewhere?
Yeah, Redwood City. Right.
Mm-hmm. What formats of radio stations did you work there? And besides being on the air, what were other assignments given to you? I've heard about radio stations where I milked the cows and then was on the air, or I cleaned up the stables and all that other good stuff. Anything unique to that experience right there?
The only thing I did in Redwood City was in later years. I was not on the radio until I was 20 years old, and that was on January 1st, 1970. And of all places, I landed in Lake Tahoe. I auditioned, got the show, and my first interview was Tony Bennett. I just couldn't. I was a kid.
Wow.
I remember he said, "Gary, meet me at my hotel room," which I did. And I said, "Tony, your daughter is beautiful." He said, "My daughter? That's my wife." I said, "Oh, my." Oh, I'm so sorry. And I cracked him up, and he said, "Why do you think I married her?" But I was beat red. Oh, my gosh. What a mistake. But Tahoe was the perfect place because I hung out with Mama Cass Elliott from the Mamas and Papas, Evel Knievel. As a young kid, I was able to interview some super people because of the casinos, the showrooms around there. So it was just the perfect place to get started. And it only lasted for 9 months. And I ended up back in the San Francisco Bay Area at an FM rocker called KVEZ, which eventually morphed into KSOL, an R&B station. And they kept me on. I was thrilled because that was a black music station. But
wow,
it worked, yeah. And I did that for 3 years.
And with the rock station, was it like a free-form FM where you could play what you want to, kind of like KMPX and KSAN?
No, they were kind of copying KFRC. And so it was a strict playlist with a clock. So it was kind of nerve-wracking, but I grew up listening to that. So it wasn't too tough for me. But I ended up, after that, working at KMPX. But they had gotten out of the freeform, and again, it was formatted. It was big band, 99 FM, very popular station. Herb Cain, a famous guy in San Francisco, had a column, always wrote about it, and I was in it quite a lot. That was his station. He just loved it. So that was a good experience. But
wow.
KSFO was the big one for 8 years. It's weird because I moved away from KSFO after 8 years, went to KYA, and they bought KSFO, so I was back simulcasting on KSFO and KYA, and it's like I couldn't get rid of KSFO. So a total of 16 years with KSFO.
Wow.
That's a long time, man.
Now, when you did KYA before it merged with KSFO, what was the format by that point for KYA?
They were, when I came, it was top 40, and then they decided to do the oldies, and we got really popular, especially the fact that we were simulcasting. We were huge. And baby boomer music, I still don't understand why more terrestrial stations aren't playing it, because it is so popular. I'm in my 16th year of doing the oldies now on the internet, classic KYA radio in San Francisco. And I get letters from the entire world from people who just love that kind of music. And for years I was able to travel with and interview just about every rock star you can think of.
Wow.
And what fun that was. What a ball. My gosh. And then I ended up working with Wolfman, and I met even more people. So it just, for a music lover, you couldn't ask for a better way to go. I still hear every day from Little Anthony and the Imperials, but a lot of the Hall of Fame rock and roll stars listen to my radio show and write to me all the time.
That's great.
It's just, it keeps it going. I want to keep that format going. I love it.
Besides Little Anthony, who is the friendliest rock and roll singers you've gotten to meet?
Well, believe it or not, Tom Jones was a sweetheart. It was supposed to be an hour with him. We ended up 3 hours.
Wow.
In the green room. We just hit it off. I was afraid to interview him because I thought the way I saw him was just kind of fake, and girls throwing their underwear and, that whole backstory. But he turned out to be just the nicest guy and absolutely adores boxing. So once we started talking about that, our whole conversation took off, and he was a ball. Ron Howard was another one that was kind of tough at first to interview until I talked about baseball, and he went berserk. He loves baseball. And Kurt Russell, another one. That wanted to be a ball player instead of an actor. So there are little things you can do to get people to talk, and those things worked really well.
That's great. This is the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Gary Mora, voiceover talent as well as radio personality on KYAradio.com. By the way, if you'd like to subscribe, just go to our YouTube channel right now at the Talking Archive 4795. That's the Talking Archive 4795. And also follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram page is JoshDJ57. That's JoshDJ57. And next time, Gary tells us about how he got back onto KYA via the World Wide Web.